The Silmarillion, Chapter 17. Of the Coming of Men into the West. This chapter is about the race of men, aka humanity, but specifically about the three kindreds of men, and these are called the Edain, the Men of Beleriand. There are three houses of the Edain: the house of Bëor, who are most like the Noldor and love knowledge; the house of Haleth, also called the Haladin. They are not interested in learning lore and kind of want to be left alone; and the house of Marach, strongest and most warlike of the Edain. The men of these houses were called elf friends. This term refers to anyone who the elves have deemed allies, but in this chapter it specifically refers to the Edain in general, who were very friendly with the elves. As the chapter begins, we are in a period of general peace. However, the servants of Morgoth are still wreaking havoc around Middle-earth, so these groups of men come into Beleriand to escape them. Finrod and the House of Bëor. There came a time when Finrod Felagund, lord of Nargothrond, came into the land of Ossiriand. There he beheld a strange people, the men of the House of Bëor. The men called Felagund Gnome, which means wisdom, and they named his folk Gnomen, the wise. These men initially thought that Felagund was one of the Valar, but he taught them what Tolkien calls true knowledge, and they loved him and were loyal afterwards to the House of Finarfin. Felagund realized that he was able to read the minds of men when they wished to reveal through speech to him, so their words were easily understood even though they spoke different languages. He also learned that the men didn't know a lot about their own origins, which was very different from the elves. Since elves did not die of old age, they were able to pass down their history much more easily than the men were. The elves understood that Morgoth had found the men even as they awoke, and had already been working to corrupt them. So even in the earliest days, the men had been going through a lot. Bëor told Felagund that the other two houses of men would be coming over the mountains soon, the Haladin and the House of Marach. Unfriended by the Green Elves. The Green Elves of Ossiriand were troubled by the coming of men and asked Felagund to tell them to return to where they had come from, or else go forward and away. They desired no strangers in their lands, and called themselves the unfriends of men, and threatened them. Not very friendly. At the advice of Felagund, Bëor moved his people to Estelad, the encampment. When Felagund returned to Nargothrond, Bëor went with him as a servant until the end of his life. When he left, Bëor left his people under the protection of Bauron, his son. Felagund often visited the men and remained close with them. The rest of the Edain arrive in Beleriand. When the Haladin came over the mountains, they went to Thargelion, the country of Caranthir, son of Feanor. When the House of Marach came in the next year, they settled in Estelad, close to the people of Bëor. They were more warlike, and the Green Elves were a bit afraid of them, so they didn't bother them along their journey. Fingolfin, who was the king of all the Noldor, welcomed the men, and many of them went into the service of the lords of the Eldar. One of these was Malach, son of Marach, who is also called Aradan. The migration of the Edain. The kings of the Noldor sent word to the Edain that they might live among their people. Thus began the great migration of the Edain. Over the next 50 years, many thousands of men moved to various regions of the Noldor. The people of Bëor came to Dorthonion. The people of Aradan went to Hithlum. Magor, son of Aradan, went to Eredwethrin. Finrod was the only one of the Noldor to speak to Thingol about the coming of men. Thingol was troubled concerning the coming of men and would not allow them to dwell in Doriath. However, and this is important, Melian made a prediction to Galadriel that one man would indeed come into Doriath. Of the men in Estelad. Many men remained in Estelad, and many of them distrusted the Eldar. Eventually these men gathered in council to debate what to do about Morgoth and his servants. Bereg and Amlach were the chief instigators of the unrest, saying they would not go north because this was where Morgoth dwelt, and they were trying to escape him. The elf friends advised the men that they could aid the elves in their war against Morgoth. Now in this time, Amlach, or one who appeared to be Amlach, came and he gave a pretty rousing speech. He said, "All this is but elvish lore, tales to beguile newcomers that are unwary. The sea has no shore. There is no light in the west. You have followed a fool fire of the elves to the end of the world. Which of you has seen the least of the gods? Who has beheld the dark king in the north? Those who seek the dominion of Middle-earth are the Eldar." However, later on the real Amlach came into the group, and he denied ever saying this. It was then that he realized a servant of Morgoth had taken on Amlach's form in order to deceive them. Many have speculated that this might have been Sauron. After this, Amlach has a personal grudge against Morgoth, and so he goes into the service of Maedhros to fight against him. Many people listened to Beric, and many doubted what they had been told. Beric ultimately led 1,000 of these people southwards, and they passed out of the story. Some of his people went back over the mountains into Eriador and also passed out of this story. The Haladin in Thargelion. Morgoth sent out orcs to destroy the Haladin who remained in Thargelion. Haldad gathered all of his men that he could find, and they built a stockade behind which to protect their women and children. However, they were under siege for so long, and their food was gone. Haldad had 2 children, Haleth his daughter, and Haldar his son. At last, Haldad and Haldar were slain by orcs. Haleth was left alone to defend her people, and fought for 7 days until finally the people of Caranthir came and drove the orcs into the rivers. After this, Caranthir offered Haleth and her people the friendship and protection of the Eldar, if only they would dwell further north. However, Haleth chose to go west into Estelad, where she brought her people to the forest of Brethil. Brethil was claimed by King Thingol, and he would have denied it to Haleth, but Felagund spoke to Thingol on her behalf, and she lived there until her death. Of Elves and Men. The Elves and men dwelt in peace together for a long time. After a while, the Elf Kings set regions apart where the men would rule themselves. Hador of the house of Marach entered the house of Fingolfin and was loved by the king. Fingolfin gave Hador the lordship of Dorloman. In Dorthonion, the lordship of the people of Bëor was given to Boromir, great-grandson of Bëor the Old. In this chapter, Tolkien drops a family tree for Hador, which includes a few names that we'll see later on, including Hurin and Huor, Turin, Earendil, Beren, Luthien, Elwing, and from these came all the kings of Númenor. The death of Bëor. When Bëor the Old died at age 93 of no wound or illness, the elves were grieved, but also confused by the mortality of men. In our next video, we'll discuss Chapter 18 of the Ruin of Beleriand and the Fall of Fingolfin. This video is a part of our Silmarillion guide series, which offers a quick and easy to understand introduction to the events, characters, and world of the Silmarillion. This guide is also available as a free ebook, which can be downloaded at teawithtolkien.com/shop. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing or telling a friend about Tea with Tolkien.